That time I got locked in a room with an unsettling man. Posted by Boyfriend's Wetters. When I was 18, I worked at my college's residence building at the front desk, and I think I almost got assaulted. Or murdered. You be the judge. During the summer, the building operated as a hotel, so 2.5 floors were hotel rooms and half of the third floor were student rooms. The whole building operated with a hotel swipe key system that was pretty outdated, and all the doors were powered by 4AA batteries. If the batteries died, there was a decently lengthy process to replace them and reprogram the door. A dark-haired guy came to the front desk from inside the building while I was working an overnight shift at around 1 or 2 a.m. and said he left his keycard in his room. I made him a new one and made my first error of the night. Hotel guests could have as many room keys remade as they wanted, hypothetically. Students, however, were supposed to be given a temporary keycard and charged $2 to be returned when theirs is located. I gave him a new key for his room and asked if he was a student or a hotel guest, and he replied, "Student." At this point, I should have checked our system to charge his account, but I was caught up doing administrative duties and forgot. I used to trust people way too easily at this job, but quickly learned not. Later on in the night, maybe around 3 or 4 a.m., he came to the desk again and said he couldn't get into his room. I asked if he just forgot his key again, and he said no, the door wasn't working. I asked if the light was coming on when he swiped his card, and he said no, so I figured the batteries were dead. I told him I'd have to change the batteries, and I went up to his room with him. He asked me for my name, and I told him. He didn't tell me his. I opened the room door manually with a master key and told him I'd have to prop it open while I worked on the back panel to replace the batteries. He said, "No, it's okay, I'll close it," and closed and deadbolted the door locked. Really fucking weird, but I tried not to think about it. I had changed the batteries on plenty of other doors by this point, and some students were iffy about having their doors propped open for their room to be on display for anyone walking by. He also had a really thick accent, and I thought he might be an international student since we had a lot of students from other countries where English was not their first language. I gave him the benefit of the doubt, and thought maybe it was also just a language barrier issue. At this point, though, I really felt like something was wrong, but I tried to ignore it so I didn't freak him out. While I was trying to focus on fixing the door as quickly as possible, he kept trying to entice me to go further into the room, saying his bed was broken and he needed me to take a look at it, there was something underneath it that needed to be fixed, etc. He held out a little gold house key and said, "I have a key, go get it," and threw it under the bed. He said there was a leak under the fridge. He just kept trying to get me down on the ground, throwing random problems at me. Obviously, I told him no, I'd send maintenance up in the morning to take a look at it if anything was broken. I had my back to him, and he asked me if I would take off my glasses. I said, "No, I need them to see." His tone of voice changed, and in the most steady, chilling manner he said, "Ella, it's okay, you can take them off." And from behind me, he reached around and tried to take off my glasses. I swatted his hand away and, trying to remain composure, said, "No, thanks. I need to keep them on." Even though he was creeping me the fuck out, I didn't want to be rude to him. I didn't want to get in trouble if he complained about me, or risk upsetting him and having him yell at me. I got up to grab something from the door repair kit, and undid the door deadbolt, and opened it up in the process. He jumped toward the door to close it again, and told me to keep it closed. I told him no, I had to open it to start reprogramming it from the front. While I held the door open with my foot and grabbed something from the door repair kit, he started playing with the little wispy hairs at the top of my forehead and trying to touch my shoulder. I swatted him away again and asked him not to touch me and focused on getting the fuck out of there. He once again tried getting me to follow him into the bedroom, saying the bed was broken, and I went as far as the doorframe to see if I could spot any actual problem with his bed. This is when I realized that he had nothing in his room. No dishes in the kitchen, No shower curtain in the bathroom, no sheets on the bed. Nothing. This wasn't his room. My brain once again went back to the international student theory, thinking he had just arrived today and hadn't gotten a chance to buy anything yet, but in the pit of my stomach, I knew something was wrong. I fiddled around with the door for a few more seconds before announcing that it was fixed, and quickly gathered the door kit and left. Before I had reached the elevator, he came back out without his shoes on to follow me. He tried to get back in to get his shoes and called out, "Ella, the door isn't fixed, you need to come back." I went back and opened the door manually, and told him if the door was broken I'd have to send up maintenance to fix it in the morning. I knew he was going to follow me to the elevator again, so I closed the door behind me once he went inside and ran down the stairwell as fast as I could. When I got to the front desk I checked the computer and saw that the room he was in was supposed to be empty. It wasn't a student room or a hotel room. I locked myself in our back office and called campus security. He came down a few minutes later and went behind the desk. I yelled at him to get on the other side and wait, now that I knew he wasn't a resident. He tore the corner off a slip of paper I had sitting on the desk and drew a flower on it, then put it back on top of my papers. When security arrived, he ran back up to the empty room and tried convincing them he lived there so he wouldn't have to leave. He kept showing them his key, which had decided to work on the door again somehow. They escorted him back downstairs and came to ask me if he really did live there. Obviously he fucking didn't, that's why I called you guys crying and terrified? He kept interjecting to argue that he did live there, but couldn't even recall his room number when asked. Security asked him for his student card and he couldn't produce it, so they told him he would have to leave if he couldn't prove he lived there. While they were grabbing his information, I listened from the office and could immediately tell he was lying. The phone number he gave was just a bunch of random numbers. The name he gave was prefixed by as if he was trying to think of a name. When they asked him for his address, he just said, "Across the street." One security guard asked if he lived in the apartments across the street, and he said yes, but couldn't tell them what the building number was. He said his apartment number was 1200, but I moved into that building a few months later and apartment 1200 doesn't exist. When security asked what his purpose was to be sneaking into a room, he just kept up the ums and ahs and saying he didn't know. They'd ask, "Were you trying to see a friend? Do you know anybody who lives here? Were you here to hurt somebody?" And he kept fidgeting and saying, "I don't know. No reason. I was just here." At one point he tried to tell them he was my friend, at which point I poked my head out of the office to say that I literally had never seen him before that night. He left. We didn't call the police because he didn't actually do anything, but it was still fucking unsettling. Later on, it dawned on me how he figured out that room was vacant. One of the housekeepers had been using it as her personal break room. A few days later a housekeeper came to the desk and told me they found the door deadbolt open, the TV on, and a housekeeper inside watching TV. She must have forgotten to close the door when she left for the night, and when the creep let himself into the building, he found it. I never saw him again, and to this day I have no clue what he was doing there. I haven't worked there since last winter and overnight shifts still have me the heebie-jeebies. My dead girlfriend keeps messaging me on Facebook. I've got the screenshots. I don't know what to do. Posted by Nate's. Tonight's kind of a catalyst for this post. I just received another message, and it's worse than any of the others. My girlfriend died on the 7th of August 2012. She was involved in a 3-car collision driving home from work when someone ran a red light. She passed away within minutes on the scene. We had been dating for 5 years at that point. She wasn't big on the idea of marriage, it felt archaic, she said, gave her a weird vibe, but if she had been, I would have married her within 3 months of our relationship. She was vibrant, the kind of girl that would choose dare every time. She was happiest when camping, but a total technophile too. She always smelled like cinnamon. That being said, she wasn't perfect. She always said something along the lines of, "If I cark it first, don't just say good things about me. I've never liked that. If you don't pay me out, you're doing me a disservice. I've got so many flaws, and that's just part of me." So, this is for M. The music she said she liked and the music she actually liked were very different. Her idea of affection was a side hug. She had really long toes, like a chimpanzee. I know that's tangential, but I don't feel right discussing her without you having an idea of what she was like. On to the meat. M had been dead for approaching 13 months when she first messaged me. September 4th, 2013. This is when it began. I had left Emily's Facebook account activated so I could send her the occasional message, post on her wall, go through her albums. It felt too final, and too un-Emily, to memorialize it. I share access with her mother Susan, meaning her mother has her login and password and has spent a total of approximately 3 minutes on the website, or on a computer, total. After a little confusion, I assumed it was her. November 16th, 2013. I had received confirmation from Susan that she hadn't logged into M's Facebook since the week of her death. M knew a lot of people, so I instantly assumed this was one of her more tech-savvy friends fucking with me in the worst possible way. I noticed pretty much immediately that whoever was chatting with me was recycling old messages from M and my shared chat history. The wheels on the bus comment was from when we were discussing songs to play on a road trip that never eventuated. Hello happened a million times. Around February 2014, Emily started tagging herself in my photos. I would get notifications for them, but the tag would generally always be removed by the time I got to it. The first time I actually caught one, it felt like someone had punched me in the gut. She would tag herself in spaces where it was plausible for her to be, or where she would usually hang out. I've got screenshots of 2, from April and June. These are the only ones I've caught, so they're a little out of the timeline I'm trying to write out. Around this period of time, I stopped being able to sleep. I was too angry to sleep. She would tag herself in random photos every couple of weeks. The friends who noticed and said something thought it was a fucked up bug. I found out recently that there have been friends who have noticed and didn't say anything. Some of them have removed me from their Facebook friends list. At this point, some of you may be wondering why I didn't just kill my Facebook profile. I wish I had. I did for a little while. On days when I can't get out there though, it's nice having my friends available to chat. It's nice visiting M's page when the little green circle isn't next to her name. I was already socially reclusive when M was alive. Her death turned me into something pretty close to a hermit, and Facebook and MMOs are my only real social outlets. On March 15th, I sent what I assumed was M's hacker a message. On March 25th, I received an answer. It wasn't until I was going over these logs a few months later that I noticed she was recycling my own words as well. My response seems kind of lackluster here. I was intentionally providing her with emotional bait. This is actually devastating, to keep them interested in their game. I was working off the assumption that the kind of person to do this would be the kind of person that would thrive on the distress of others. I was posting in tech forums, looking for ways to track this person, contacting Facebook. I needed to keep them around so I could gather evidence. Before anyone asks, yes, I had changed the password and all security info countless times. 16th of April. I received this. This seems like word salad. Like all our conversations so far, it's recycled from previous messages she's sent. 29th of April. I hadn't discovered any leads. Facebook had told me the locations her page had been accessed from, but since her death, they're all places I can account for: my home, my work, her mom's house, etc. My response here wasn't bait. Yo, ask Nathan was an in-joke too lame worth explaining. but seeing her say it again just absolutely fucking crippled me. My reaction in real life was much less prettier. I'm not expecting my bond back. Her last few messages had started to scare me, but I wouldn't admit it at this point. 8th of May. I don't really have the words for this. FRE as in G is the first original word she's made. This has given me nightmares that have only started to kick in recently. I keep dreaming that she's in an ice-cold car, frozen blue and gray, and I'm standing outside in the warmth screaming at her to open the door. She doesn't even realize I'm there. Sometimes her legs are outside with me. 24th of May. I wasn't actually drunk. She wasn't an affectionate girl, and it always embarrassed her to exchange I love yous, cuddle, talk about how much we meant to each other. She was more comfortable with it when I was boozed up. I got fake drunk a lot. Her reply is what prompted me to finally memorialize her page, thinking it might help curb this behavior. It might seem innocuous compared to her previous message. It's pasted from an old conversation where I was trying to convince her to let me drive her home from a friend's. In the collision, the dashboard had crushed her. She was severed in a diagonal line from her right hip to midway down her left thigh. One of her legs was found tucked under the back seat. Going back in time. 7th of August 2012. These are logs from the day she died. She was usually home from work by 4:30. This, alongside a couple of voicemail messages, is the last time I talked to her under the assumption that she was alive. You'll see why I'm showing you these soon. Yesterday, 1st of July 2014. I memorialized her page a couple of days after I received the message about walking. Until today, she'd been quiet. She wasn't even tagging herself in my photos. I don't know what to do anymore. Do I kill her memorial page? What if it is her? I want to puke. I don't know what's happening. I just heard a Facebook alert. I'm too afraid to swap windows and check it. Paradise Pine. Posted by C.K. Walker. 5 years ago, my husband and I decided to spend Thanksgiving at a cabin up north. We planned on starting a family the following year, and so we wanted one last romantic holiday with just the two of us. We found the place online through a website we've used in the past and booked it for a week. The cabin was located outside of Pinetop, Arizona, and the owner warned us that it can be hard to get back to in the winter because of the snow. The property was 13 miles from the nearest town and 4 miles from the nearest paved road. Aaron and I weren't worried, however, since our Jeep had snow tires and we were also bringing tire chains. We arrived on a Friday afternoon. We had made excellent time on the drive as there was actually very little snow on the ground. We decided to take a tour of the cabin before we unloaded the car. The cabin, named Paradise Pine, was 3 stories tall and built into the side of a mountain. The top floor was simply the master bedroom, which was connected to a 3rd-story balcony via a sliding glass door. The front door was located on the 2nd floor, along with the kitchen and living room, and the basement housed another bedroom, a washer, a dryer, and a wood furnace that heated the cabin through a large pipe that extended up through all 3 floors. Even though the views through the bay windows were beautiful, the first thing we noticed when we walked in was that the cabin hadn't been cleaned. Oftentimes with very rural properties, the owner will offer to waive the $150 cleaning fee if you are willing to clean the place yourself before you depart. Most guests opt to do this, but in the rare occurrence they don't, the owner sends a cleaning crew. The previous tenants in this cabin had clearly decided not to clean, and also not to inform the owner that they were leaving it dirty. Since it was a holiday and a snowstorm was forecasted for early next week, we decided to clean the cabin ourselves and asked the owner to reduce our bill when we left the following Friday. We brought everything in from the Jeep and got to work with dishes and laundry. Afterwards, we made an easy dinner, opened a bottle of wine, and played a few games of billiards on the pool table in the living room. The temperature started to plummet at around 6 in the evening, and I asked my husband, Aaron, to go down and light the furnace in the basement. I went up to the bedroom to wash my face and change into warmer clothes. The bathroom connected to our bedroom was oddly doorless, had a broken mirror and a torn-down shower curtain. Wow, there's been some cowboys in here. They hadn't even bothered to pick the glass up off the floor before they left. I did so carefully, regretting the stupidity of the drunken idiots who must have stayed here the week before. I took a few photos with my phone and planned to send them to the owner when we got back to town on Monday. I certainly didn't want to be charged for damage inflicted by the previous tenants. I met Aaron on the main level of the house and told him about the bathroom. Well, that's not the only thing that's broken. The light's out in the basement, and I couldn't find a flashlight. I did manage to find the furnace though. I squirted some of that cheap vodka your sister sent in there, threw in a match and hoped for the best. Seems to be working, I stammered through now chattering teeth. I can feel the heat coming through. I held my hands up to the metal pipe that wound its way around the house. Keep the basement door closed. It's freezing down there. One of our favorite things to do when staying at a cabin is to read through all the journal entries of the previous guests. Usually, it was just things like, went fishing with the kids, caught a bass, or had a barbecue, played cards with the family. But occasionally you found something more interesting, like, got drunk, set a tree on fire. We found the Paradise Pine diary and snuggled up on the couch. Aaron read aloud the first 4 or 5 entries before I decided to take over. We were about halfway through the book when we called it a night and went to bed. The following evening we stayed up late as we had had a long nap that day. The plan had been to go on a hike, but it had been too cold out. Luckily, the furnace in the basement was, to our amazement, still burning. We spent the whole day lazing around the living room. After dinner, Aaron practiced pool while I read aloud from the journal, starting where we had left off. I read for an hour before finally arriving at the journal entry of the guests who had stayed before us. I was very interested in this one. These people had to have a good story. The writer had chosen to format his entries into dates with time stamps. There were over 6 pages, and I could already tell the handwriting sort of disintegrated as the days wore on. Wow, they must have been drunk all weekend. Look at how messy this handwriting gets. I held the book up to Aaron. Can you read it? He asked, spinning the 8-ball into a corner pocket. Of course. I'm great at reading other people's shitty handwriting by now. I sent him an impish grin and took another sip of wine before beginning to read. Sunday, November 4th, 3:30 p.m. Wow, what a beautiful cabin! My wife and I booked this place for 2 weeks on a whim, and we can't believe how lucky we got. Barely made it back here with the truck. There's snow everywhere. At least a foot deep. And it's below 40 degrees outside. Thankfully the furnace in the basement is huge, as promised by Marissa, so all 3 floors are warm and cozy. Monday, November 5th, 11:30 a.m. We're snowed in. We had wanted to run home today to grab a few things we forgot, but that is definitely not happening. The road is unmanageable, so it appears we aren't going anywhere. Looks like we will be spending most of our day inside drinking mimosas and playing poker. As you can see, we aren't too upset about it. Tuesday, November 6th, 7:25 p.m. My wife Sarah is currently making roast chicken, and I'm finally going to start writing. This is the reason we came here, after all, and I refuse waste the opportunity to cure my writer's block. It's just so gorgeous here I haven't written a damn thing. I also saw someone walking around the tree line today. I have no idea how they are surviving out there. We won't even go outside. It was 34 degrees last I checked. Wednesday, November 7th, 9 p.m. Today Sarah and I made a snowman and snow angels. We don't get snow in Scottsdale, so we are taking full advantage of it. I haven't been able to write anything new, but I did edit the previous 2 chapters of my book. I think the beauty of this place is just too distracting. I'm kidding. Sort of. I think we may have neighbors. I was having a cigarette out on the balcony last night, and I saw someone at the treeline again. He is extremely tall, and certainly close enough to say hello, but when I waved he walked back into the woods. We'll have to ask Marissa about this. She didn't mention any neighbors nearby. Thursday, November 8th, 1 p.m. This morning I woke up to find animal tracks all around the outside of the cabin. I don't know what sort of animal made them. The prints were the shape of a rectangle, almost like they were made by the end of a 2x4. By the time Sarah got up at 11, the snow had mostly melted, but you could still kinda see them. I think last night's snow is the last we will get while we are here. The sky is looking pretty clear. Sarah thinks I am succumbing to cabin fever, so today we are going for a hike since it's so beautiful out. Friday, November 9th, 7 a.m. Last night someone tried to get into the house. I woke up at about 1 in the morning to the sound of banging on the front door. Not knocking, banging. I went downstairs and grabbed a pool stick. I asked who it was and the banging stopped. I waited a few minutes and then opened the door, but there was nothing there. I started back up the stairs to wake up Sarah, as she is a heavy sleeper. The banging sounded again, more urgently this time, and from the other side of the room, on the wall next to the bookshelf. It stopped after a long minute, and I sat down on the steps and waited all night for them to try something. Nothing happened after that. Friday, November 9th, 2 p.m. I told Sarah what happened and she wants to leave. I'm not really convinced, but Sarah scares easily. I will admit that I'm a bit on edge. I tried to start the car this morning, but nothing happened. I'm not a car guy and I have no idea what to do. We can't hike out, there's no signal out here, and we can't find a house phone. We talked about it and decided we're just going wait it out here. I know people have this cabin rented out on the 16th, so we'll just have to wait the week for them. I did find a wood axe which I'm keeping in the bedroom, just in case they come back to harass us. I think it's probably a homeless person living out in the woods. There were tracks around the house again this morning, and I'm no longer convinced they're from an animal. We'll see if they come back. Saturday, 5 a.m. Last night the knocking was back. But it was something knocking on the sliding door to our bedroom, from the second-story patio. I don't know how it climbed up there. It knocked on the window, gently, almost coaxingly. A thin curtain covers the sliding glass door, so I couldn't see what it was. The knocking finally stopped, and a full minute later it started again, becoming the loud, insistent banging of the night before. I reached over Sarah and grabbed the axe, bounding out of bed as she screamed. By the time I got to the sliding door, the banging has stopped. I threw back the curtain, but there was no one on the patio. In the moonlight, I saw it walking away from the cabin, back toward the treeline. Sarah stumbled over to the window and I showed her the retreating figure. She covered her face and cried. What we saw terrified us both. It's not a human. It's tall, maybe 10 feet, and skinny. It looks like a black stick figure, impossibly thin. It has no hands or feet, just stumps. And no face. It's just a black oval, with no features. The contrast was horrifying, this tall, black stick man walking through the snow. It reached the treeline and disappeared. I spent the next hour trying to calm Sarah down. She said we need to leave. I think she's right. When we were finally calm enough to lie in bed again, the silence was deafening. I felt myself slowly start to drift off. It was out of this silence that the knocking came again, this time on our bedroom door. I jumped out of bed and grabbed the axe again. Sarah backed into a corner and screamed. By the time I threw open the door, the knocking had stopped and there was nothing there. But the front door was wide open. It can get inside the cabin. I don't know what it wants. Saturday, 5 p.m. I am terrified. My wife is terrified. Today I considered setting the car on fire, just to see if the smoke would attract someone's attention. Sarah wouldn't let me because it's our only way out. So we packed the car up instead. Maybe when the snow melts more, we'll be able to fix the car. I catch Sarah staring off a lot, and she hasn't said much since she saw the stick man. Seeing the thing, it's affected me too. I have been having migraines today. I've never had a migraine before. I want to protect my wife, but I don't know what to do. I caught Sarah staring at me, almost in a trance earlier. I asked her what was wrong and she said, "It eats us." She seemed to snap out of it pretty quick after that, and asked me why I was staring at her. She doesn't remember saying it, and we can't figure out what it means. This thing is fucking with our heads. Sunday, 10 a.m. Last night I stayed up all night. It's lightly snowing. All was quiet. Sunday, 7 p.m. I found footprints this afternoon on the upstairs balcony. The same rectangle ones the stick man makes. He was outside our window again. I brushed them away before Sarah could see. It stopped snowing an hour ago, and it's twilight now. I can see him in the tree line. I saw him turn around and walk back into the woods. His profile is as thin as a piece of paper. The stick man came back, though. I think we're going to die here. Monday, November 12th, 9 a.m. Last night I went out on the balcony at around 8 for a cigarette. I heard a noise behind me and turned to see the stick man on the roof, 5 feet above me. I ran back inside to grab the axe and screamed at Sarah to arm herself. I turned around to run back outside and heard the stick man running above me on the roof, in the same direction. When I got outside, the thing was gone. I saw it running off into the trees again. But it was different. It was taller. I think there's more than one. When I got back inside, Sarah had locked herself in the upstairs bathroom. She was hysterical and kept saying she was going to die here. I tried to give her the pool stick, but she wouldn't open the door for anything. I sat on the bed and waited. At some point Sarah must have fallen asleep because all was quiet. It was then that I first heard it walking around in the kitchen. I backed away from the bedroom door, courage suddenly failing me. It was in the house. I waited for more sounds from the kitchen, but none came. After a few minutes, I finally heard a thump. It was on the stairs. It was climbing the stairs. Thump. Slowly, but loudly. Thump. I banged the bedroom door from my side and told it to leave us alone. Thump. Sarah was screaming again, sobbing. It could hurt me, but I would never let it hurt my family. It stopped when it got to the top step. I could feel it on the other side of the door. It didn't make a noise. I tried to think of a strategy that would give me the upper hand if it attacked. I finally decided that if I threw the door open, it would knock the stick man down the stairs. On the count of 3 I turned the handle and kicked the door. It swung open freely, and I saw the black stick man still down on the landing of the stairs, facing me. It was more than 10 feet tall. I was paralyzed with horror for several long seconds when it started running up the stairs at me without warning. I stumbled back into the room as fast as I could as I realized that death at the hands of the stick man was more than death. Worse than death. It ate you. It kept you. It stopped at the top step and dipped its head through the door, taking 2 steps into the room. It was just a tall black shadow. Almost more of a dense absence of light than a solid black. Realizing the axe was still in my hand, I moved between the stick man and the bathroom door. I raised the axe to attack, and at that moment the stick man screamed. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before. I wanted to hold my hands over my ears as I felt an ebbing thunder in my brain. I heard the mirrors shatter in the bathroom from the sound. I thought of Sarah. With the last ounce of strength I had, I ran at the thing, axe high, and brought it down in the creature's chest. Over and over again for what felt like forever but was probably no time at all. It threw me aside and I heard my wife scream. That's the last thing I remember before I passed out. When I opened my eyes again, it was mid-morning. My wife was gone. The bathroom door was gone. And the axe was gone. I looked for Sarah all morning. I walked deep into the woods. I searched for miles. I am going to sleep for a few minutes, and then go back out into the woods to find her. I hope I meet the stick man. If Sarah is dead, I want to be dead too. I think that's what it wanted all along. Monday, November 12th, 6 p.m. It's getting dark and harder to search the woods. In my mind, all I hear is her voice. It eats us. Over and over again. What has it done to her? I couldn't save her. After everything, I couldn't save her. When I first realized I had forgotten my medication, the snowstorm stopped us from leaving. But when I saw the stick man, I thought it had been a blessing in disguise. I needed to be clear-minded and alert to protect my family, and I couldn't do that when I was on the haloperidol. But it didn't matter in the end anyway. I couldn't save her. The car started on the first try this morning. It's letting me leave. I'm going to drive around to the other side of the mountain and walk back towards the cabin. Maybe I'll find the stream. Maybe I'll find Sarah. It would be useless to stay another day. The stick man is gone. I know it in my heart. And it's below freezing and the furnace has burned out. The firewood is gone. If I find her, I'll come back and write in this book. My only friend, now. Aaron had stopped playing pool long ago, and the wine hadn't been touched since I started reading. We stared at each other as the last words of the diary soaked into the air. We both seemed to wake from our paralyzed state at the same time. I threw the book across the room and Aaron backed up into the bookcase saying, "Jesus! This is fake, right?" I asked as I stood up. I didn't need the glass of wine anymore. I needed the bottle. "I don't know, Linz, I don't think so." "The guy said he was a writer," I insisted. "He probably just wanted to write a scary story for other guests. Although he really crossed the line into downright disturbing." I took a sip of wine and turned around to see Aaron eyeing the stairs, warily. "You can't be serious, Aaron. It's creepy as shit, I agree, but come on." Almost like he didn't hear me, Aaron started ascending the stairs. I don't know what he wanted to see up there, but I put the wine down and followed him. By the time I got into the bedroom, Aaron was sliding the glass door open. I followed him out onto the balcony. You could see the tree line from the patio very clearly. I searched the woods for any movement but saw nothing. I turned to say something to Aaron and found him studying the roof. He threw a wild look at me and walked back inside. I followed him in. Aaron paced around the room. "What?" I was starting to get annoyed. "It's all just like in the story. You can see the tree line, the field and the roof from the balcony. And look, Dash." He pointed to the attached bathroom. "There are hinges but no door. There should be a door, it's a bathroom. And the mirror, Dash, what?" I interjected. "Was shattered by the stick man's scream?" He was starting to scare me. Aaron was usually the most logical person I knew. "The stick man? Did you even pay attention to what you read? There was no stick man. No shit. No, I mean there never was. His last entry about the medication, and how they got snowed in and couldn't go back for it. Haloperidol, it's used to treat schizophrenia. Lindsay, go read it again. The entire thing is him slowly succumbing to his psychosis, page by page. Hell, his wife knew it was happening. This is madness, Aaron." I walked into the bathroom and looked around. "You think someone died in here? 4 days ago?" Aaron shook his head. "I don't know. I think it's a possibility. The shower curtain is torn down, the mirror is broken. It certainly looks like there could have been a struggle in here. And the door, the axe, both missing." The logic of his conclusions dawned on me. "Oh my God, if this is real! Aaron, we cleaned this place top to bottom when we got here. If there was a murder, we've destroyed all the evidence. We didn't know. We didn't know that someone died here, Dash. We still don't know. Aaron, where's the body? I don't know. Maybe it's buried out in the woods. We need to leave. We need to go get help. Let's take the book to the police and tell them what we found when we got here. Just to be safe." "Okay. Okay, Jesus, this guy could come back anytime. Let's get out of here. We had just started down the stairs when another thought occurred to me. I stopped on the landing. Aaron. He turned around. Yeah? He said the fire in the furnace had burned out. Did you put firewood in when you lit it? No, it was almost pitch black. I couldn't see any firewood. But we've been burning that furnace for almost a day. I could see the implications slowly draw over Aaron's face. What have we been burning, Aaron? He ran for the basement door, and I followed. When he opened the door, I can't describe to you what came up from below. It was a hot, pungent, heavy air. I stood on the top step as Aaron descended into the basement. The axe is down here. I took a deep breath and followed him down. I stopped on the bottom stair, refusing to go any further. It was still very dark but for the light coming down the stairs and a soft orange glow in the back of the room. Aaron knelt in front of the stove door. He looked over at me and I nodded. Aaron slowly turned the handle and pulled open the furnace door. The fire inside lit his face and after a moment, the horror expressed there told me everything I needed to know. They found Jason Harding less than a day later. He had hung himself out in the woods 50 yards from the cabin. In fact, he had been hanging there when we pulled up on Sunday, the 18th of November. I've often wondered if he hung himself because he wanted to be with his wife, or if he hung himself because he realized what he had done. I hoped it was the latter because I hated him so much. Not for his mental illness, not for his crime, but for what he did to us. Sarah Harding had burned in that furnace for a day, and for a day, we had breathed in every atom of her body. We had kept warm by the flesh of her corpse. Why didn't it smell? We were given a very scientific explanation citing high burning temperatures, years of pine infusion, and the pieces of wooden door burning in there with her. But it didn't stop the nightmares. The case made headline news, at least locally. It was dubbed the Murder Cabin. Aaron and I managed to prevent our names being associated with Paradise Pine through an anonymity clause on our witness statements. We never told our friends or families we were involved. We tried to forget. Paradise Pine still stands today. It is even available for rent. The owner insisted on keeping the cabin journal, so the police department tore out Jason Harding's pages and gave it back to her. It still sits on the table next to the bookshelf, and tenants still read it and write in it about their own weekends. I pity those people. I know they wonder about the torn pages and they will never know what was written on them. They will laugh at the doorless bathroom and wonder why the furnace in the basement has a sour smell. But they won't realize why. Because after the headlines about the gruesome murder began to fade from the spotlight, the owner renamed the cabin. And now those who book it will never know they are bringing their families to the famous murder cabin. They won't find out that the furnace that warms them at night is where she burned. They won't realize the tree their children are climbing on is the one from which Jason Harding hanged. Because they cannot know that the place they sleep is actually the Paradise Pine. Something awful happened to my parents. Now my mother won't stop screaming. Posted by Like I Did. We were on our way home, after watching the new Hunger Games movie. My sister Olivia was falling asleep next to me. We were all silent, listening to the radio when my dad suddenly came to a full stop. It took me a second to realize what he had seen. A small truck was blocking most of the road in front of us. "What's going on there?" Olivia asked in a sleepy voice. That's when a young woman stumbled out of the truck and walked around it to the side that wasn't in vision. Her legs seemed to be hurt. She was grabbing the side of the truck to stay in balance. My parents immediately got into helper mode, seeing a person who didn't look much older than their children. I guess she was around 20 or so. "Stephen, call 911. I'll go check if she's alright," my father said. "Maybe we should stay in the car and wait for help, honey. I've seen people tricking people into getting out of their car and dash." "We can't just sit here and wait, Mary. There might be someone even more hurt on the other side. Before my mother could say anything else, he was already stepping out of the car. My mother opened her door to follow. Kids, lock the car and stay inside. We were stopped on a quiet road. Around us were only trees. They slowly walked towards the other side of the truck. My father called out to the stranger. After that, we didn't hear anything else. I grabbed my phone and called an ambulance. Should we check on them? Olivia asked after a while. I don't know, Mum said. Before I could finish my sentence, my mother appeared from the back of the truck. Her face had lost all its color. She was walking fast and determined. When she reached the car, Olivia unlocked the doors. She sat down behind the wheel without a word. Her expression was eerily calm. Mom? I whispered. What's going on? Is someone hurt? My mother didn't respond. And suddenly she opened her mouth as wide as humanly possible and screamed from the top of her lungs. I unbuckled my seatbelt, leaned over, and grabbed her by the shoulder. Mom? Mom? What happened? Olivia shouted and grabbed her door handle, but before she could open it, my mother had locked all the doors. She stopped screaming and took a few breaths before she hit the gas and started driving in reverse. After we were so far away that we couldn't really see the truck anymore, she turned around and took a different road to our home. She didn't respond to us. She didn't answer any questions. We kept asking about Dad, but she said nothing. Next to me, Olivia started crying, and then she took out her phone to call the police again. When we reached our driveway, my mother finally unlocked the car. Still silent, she walked straight home. Olivia and I exchanged a look of fear and shock. Then she jumped to the front of the car. I'm going back. You go inside. No, I'm coming with you. Even from inside the car, we heard the shrill sound of my mother's scream coming from our house. We ignored it and kept driving until we found the road with the trees. I kept trying to call my dad the entire time, but it went straight to voicemail. There was a police car waiting, but no sign of a truck. One officer was waiting by the police car, another one was looking around the side of the road. We jumped out of the car and asked where our father was. The officer told us that they arrived a few minutes ago and that there was no sign of anyone. At first, they asked us if we played a prank on them, but when he saw our concerned faces and listened to our story, he said that they would follow us home and talk to our mother. Don't worry, we will do anything we can to find your father, he said before we went back into the car. My entire body was trembling. I had never in my life experienced anything this frightening, and I couldn't stop thinking about my dad. I hated that he didn't listen to my mom's concerns. When we reached our house, the lights in the kitchen were on. The officers followed us inside. My mother wasn't screaming anymore, but we heard the kettle in the kitchen. We followed the sound, expecting to find my mother there. I almost cried in relief when I saw that it was actually my dad. His hair was greasy, and he had changed into his pajamas. Kids, I've been worried sick about you, he said loudly, and then his gaze shifted to the two police officers. Sir, are you all right? Dad, we've been trying to call you. What the hell happened? Olivia shouted and tried to run to him, but one of the officers held her back. I'm absolutely fine. Fantastic even. Except for the fact that I had to take a taxi home. The prices of that, sir. We need to ask you what happened to the truck and the woman inside. My dad shook his head. She was fine. Her car just wouldn't start, so I helped her, and then she drove off. All good. Was there anyone else with her? My dad shook his head. May we talk to your wife? She already went to bed, but I suppose we can wake her up. One of the officers walked upstairs with my father, while Olivia and I stayed in the kitchen with the other one and explained the situation one more time. When the other officer returned, he explained to us that my mother told the same story about the broken-down car. Apparently, my mother remembered that the stove was still on, so she quickly drove home with us. You could hear the skepticism in his voice, but there wasn't much else they could do. They gave us their number and told us to call when anything else came up or parents said anything. After they left, I went to touch the stove. It was ice cold. A little after that, my mother started screaming again. I hardly slept that night. We kept asking my mom what had happened, but she didn't answer our questions. My dad just kept telling us that everything was fine and sent us to bed. Finally, my mother stopped screaming and the house turned silent. The next morning, I walked down and heard the sound of laughter. My parents were standing in the kitchen, making pancakes without a care in the world. Olivia was already sitting by the table, staring into nothing in front of her, her expression empty. We locked eyes and I saw that she had slept just as little as I. "Morning, honey. Did you sleep well?" my mother said in a melodic voice. "Apparently everything is totally fine," Olivia said in a mocking tone towards me. I sat down next to her and my mother started stacking pancakes on a plate and walked towards me. She stopped right in front of the table and dropped the plate. The shatters flew in all directions. Suddenly her face turned pale again. Her eyes were opened wide and then she screamed again, looking at us the entire time. "Mom?" Olivia jumped up from her seat and grabbed her shoulders. "Everything is all right, love," my father calmly said. My mother blinked and looked at the ground. Her face relaxed. "Oh, won't you look at that, what a mess," she said and smiled at us. We went through the strangest breakfast we ever had. Olivia and I had stopped asking them what was going on. We didn't get answers anyway. Their attempts to distract us were only frustrating and scaring us more. After breakfast, I followed my sister to her room. Olivia was only a year younger than me, and we'd always been very close. I don't know how I would have dealt with this situation without her. We were both afraid of and for our parents. "What do we do?" she asked after I sat down on her desk chair. "I don't know. Should we call someone? Uncle Freddie maybe?" We didn't have many relatives that lived nearby. Uncle Freddie was the only one, and he was still an hour's drive away. Not sure if he can do anything. They are acting like everything is normal. Except when Mum screams, Olivia said, and a shiver went down my spine at the thought of it. Something happened with that truck. I just wish they would tell us, my sister whispered. Me too. And Dad is acting even stranger. He doesn't even acknowledge her screams. We both sat there for a moment, lost in our thoughts, when we heard the door downstairs close shut, and a little later the car started running. Olivia looked out the window. "It's Dad. So Mum's alone downstairs?" We quietly walked down the stairs and made our way to our living room. My mother was sitting on the sofa. In her hand, she held a needle and yarn, but she wasn't moving. She looked completely spaced out. When she noticed us, she slightly moved her face towards us. Her mouth opened, but this time she didn't scream, she just kept it open. I walked over to her and sat down on the ground in front of her. "Please, Mum, talk to us. I don't know if you're trying to protect us from something, but this isn't helping. We're old enough and we are here for you. What happened last night?" She blinked and then shook her head as if she was just waking up from a daydream. Her mouth closed again. Her eyes went to me and then to my sister. "It's hard to remember. Something keeps blocking my memories. I know that something isn't right, but it's almost as if my mind keeps falling asleep. I can't control it." Olivia came closer and sat down beside me. "Maybe we should take you to a doctor. I mean, the screaming really scares us, Mom." My mother looked confused. "What screaming?" I swallowed. "Do you remember anything about that woman? We lost her." Her eyes opened wide. For a moment it looked as if she was smiling, but then her mouth opened so much that her face got all wrinkly. From the looks of it, it was as if she was screaming, but this time no sound came out. I just grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her. Finally, her expression softened. Her eyes and mouth closed for a moment. She looked at the terrified faces of my sister and me. Then she tightly grabbed my arm. "She wasn't a woman. I don't know what she was. It all happened so fast. But kids," a tear rolled down her cheek. "I saw your father die. I don't know who that man is that came back to us." Dread filled my entire body. It felt as if a dark blanket was falling over us. I heard my mother's words, but I just couldn't believe her. I didn't want to. Suddenly I heard the door slam shut. Olivia got up and pulled out her phone. She was just about to call an ambulance when my father walked into the room. My mother's face changed again. She was smiling, genuinely smiling. "And Mum isn't feeling well. I'm calling a doctor for her," Olivia said with a trembling voice. She looked at me and I saw how afraid she was of my dad. She was trying to get us out of here. My father took the phone from her hand and shook his head. "No need. Your mother is fine. Everything is perfectly fine. I was actually thinking we could go to the cinema again tonight." I forced my body to get up. "That sounds like a fine idea. I haven't seen the new Hunger Games movie yet. How about that one?" He smiled. "That sounds like a terrific idea." "Yeah, I haven't seen it yet either," Olivia added. "Can you get our coats from upstairs, Dad?" He got up without a word and walked up the stairs. Olivia and I each grabbed one of my mother's arms. Together we quickly walked her outside and got her into the car, still wearing our pajamas and no shoes. "Where are we going?" my mother asked from the back seat. "We're going to visit Uncle Freddie," Olivia answered in a shaky voice. "But honey, we can't just leave your dad here." The Artist. Posted by Num9. There's this painting my wife loves called Death and Life by Klimt. I don't know what she finds so fascinating about it. I made all the right noises when she showed me her beloved framed print when we were first dating, wooing and eyeing and making up some bullshit about warm and cold color schemes and the specific choice of angles and line. She was an artist. Our first few dates involved long walks through museums, starting in Picasso's Blue Period and ending in heavy petting and blue balls. I took an art history course as an elective when I was finishing up my doctorate. I remembered enough of the lingo to charm my fantastically gorgeous future wife and lure her back to my stupidly filthy apartment. We're talking me as the foul bachelor frog, sitting on a lily pad made of empty takeout containers surrounded by a pond of enough unwashed clothes to keep a laundromat in business for a cool 6 months. I remember scrambling to find 2 of any sort of cup-like container for the bottle of wine we had brought back while she was in the bathroom. I rinsed out a couple of coffee mugs and ran into the bedroom to try to clean up the condom wrappers that had been sitting on my bedside table since 2003. On the bed, neatly laid out against the rest of the chaos, were my wife's dress, bra and panties. She came out of the bathroom completely nude aside from a pair of high heels, took the wine from me and took a swig straight from the bottle. I fell totally, completely and irrevocably in love. I have no head for artistic things. I work in finance. I get creative with numbers, not paint, but I fucking love her stuff. She's made a name for herself over the past few years. Critics call her the American Damien Hirst. One of her first exhibits was composed of a dozen oil paintings of rotting pastries, surrounding an actual cake filled with thousands of dead ladybugs being fed to a mummified tarantula dressed up as Little Miss Muffet. I have no idea what it meant, but it was sick, successful, and catered by Balthazar, so I ate about 20 croissants. They did not have bugs in them. I checked. She was amazing. She had the body of a Laker girl and the face of a Modigliani model, and still does. She's charming, charismatic, deep, the kind of person people flock to, want to be around constantly. She fucked like she had something to prove. She had a twisted sense of humor. As soon as I hooked a job with enough figures to keep a girl like her satisfied the way she should be, I proposed, bought her a historical brownstone in the city with a garden full of roses and hardwood mahogany floors. And for the first few years she seemed happy. We were the kind of couple you see in New York Magazine and scoff at because they're just too damned lucky. But we had a rough spot, like all married couples do. She was still superficially the same woman I fell in love with. Looked amazing. People always asked me when she was going to host the next dinner party. She still had an amazing eye for art. I knew, though I knew she was miserable. I could see it, the misery in the corners of her eyes and the curve of her mouth. It happened gradually. First it was the shower curtain. She bought 3 or 4 from a small boutique downtown, brought them home so we could choose one out together. We decided on one, pale blue, made of material that was impractical and way too expensive for a drapery in a bathroom, but we had the money, and it made her happy, so why the hell not? A few days later, I was shaving and realized she still hadn't put the curtain up. It wasn't until about a month after that I caught a glimpse of it hanging up in her studio, cut to shreds and dyed till it was almost unrecognizable. I chose to ignore it because I had learned it's usually not the best course of action to call an artist out on their creative license, unless you want to start an all-out war with no discernible end. A year after that, though, I had no choice. She had been so on edge it was like she was standing on a razor. She usually had a show every 3-4 months or so, and if anything she had too many ideas, the galleries always asked her to trim down her collections. When the year passed without so much as a single finished painting, I started to worry, both about her well-being and our bank account. We were extravagant spenders, and each of her shows would bring in a cool $20,000 that paid for a few months of European beaches and ski trips in Aspen. The final straw, though, is when she burned down the roses. It turned out she had finished dozens of projects over the year. She had hated all of it, and had either destroyed or painted over everything. While I was at the office, she flew off the handle, doused about 16 canvases in lighter fluid, and set the yard on fire. When I got the call from the fire department, I rushed home to find her sitting in the back of the ambulance, covered in ashes, blonde hair singed at the ends. She was smoking a cigarette. I looked over the burnt flowers, the skeletons of her paintings, the ruined limbs of broken sculptures, and asked her what happened and why. She took a drag of the cigarette and said, "It was mine to burn." She took big, fancy pictures of the inferno. A family of bunnies suffocated in the smoke. She had them stuffed and mounted in size order on a baking soda volcano like the kind you see in middle school science fairs. She gathered up a few of the charred bits and pieces, wired it together, and made some warped, pain-looking kind of phoenix thing weighing in at 400 pounds and easily over 8 feet high. She called the whole thing From the Ashes, and the reviews in the Times called it incendiary. Her first foray into becoming a true artist. Someone bought the phoenix. I pity the person who wakes up every day and looks at that strange thing, suspended in constant agony. We were both drunk, at a random, expensive, vaguely Dante's Inferno-themed bar in San Francisco when I finally got a chance to ask her what was bothering her. We had been making dark jokes all night about the beautiful irony of her show and our current locale. First she vehemently denied anything was wrong, angrily pointing out that we had made 4 times as much off of her last show as anything before it, that it had more than covered the damages, that it had paid for the vacation we were on. I stayed silent. She tossed her newly cropped hair, and looked like she was going to open up for a second. I saw her soft blue eyes fill with tears, then she took a shot of whiskey from a glass that had a bull's head and smirked. "Well, for starters," she slurred, nonchalantly dangling the glass from the bull's nose ring, "I'm fairly certain I'm pregnant." She let the glass drop from her finger, and it shattered on the floor as she slid out of her seat and stumbled to the exit. I sat there for a while and drank more, feeling furious, confused, and miserable. I remembered her face when she showed me that Klimt painting. I remembered how she wore glasses back then, and how she pushed them up the bridge of her nose when she smiled as I talked about the fucking warm and the fucking cold colors and the fucking angles and lines. We converted her studio into a nursery. Rather, I did, while she stayed in San Francisco and did God knows what with her artist friends. I had a landscaper come in and replant the roses. I worked a lot of overtime, drank myself to sleep while I skimmed through parenting books. She came back when she was almost full term. I came home from work one night to find sonogram pictures posted all over the fridge of 2 healthy-looking twins, big baby girls. I walked into our bedroom and saw her dead asleep on top of the covers, belly swollen, smelling faintly like pot and paint thinner. She had a rainbow of dried paint on her fingertips. I loosened my tie and walked to the nursery. She had been busy. The canary yellow I had chosen was covered in a layer of translucent blue, and she had covered one wall in Klimt-esque patterns and curlicues. The creamy plush carpet was covered in paint splatters she had worked furiously to finish. She had cut a swathe from one of the new rose bushes and made a giant bouquet, shoving them so tightly in the vase that some had escaped and made their way from their perch on the changing table to the floor. She had scattered them in the bassinet, on the windowsill. It was chaotic and beautiful. The next few years were peaceful, for the most part. We bonded over raising the girls. Despite my wife's less than careful prenatal preparation, they were wickedly smart and beautiful. They both looked like her, with long curly blonde ringlets and blue eyes. Sometimes, when I put them to bed, I wondered if any of my DNA was in them at all. They were like miniature versions of her. My wife agreed to see a psychiatrist for a little bit. She took some medication for a while, Xanax, some mood stabilizers. Eventually she and her doctor decided her crisis had been hormonal and temporary. We started having dinner parties again, soothed the gossip that had infected our social circles. She stopped painting and took up teaching at a university. She seemed content again, even happier than she was before. Every once in a while I would catch a look in her eyes like repressed artillery fire, like she was ready to explode at any second, but it never lasted for longer than a few seconds before they went back to the soft cornflower blue I knew so well. And who doesn't get a little agitated every once in a while? I rose through the ranks at work. I loved the feeling of power that came with promotions. I loved my girls. And by God, I loved her. My crazy, disgusting, beautiful, hateful and loving, extraordinary wife. Then came today. Today, I came home from work early. Today, my wife took the day off to be a chaperone on a class trip to the Met. They were after her for months because of her expertise in the art world. They wanted the children to experience the culture in the most sophisticated way possible. I thought it was ridiculous. They were 1 to 3-year-olds in a private daycare. They saw more beauty in Cheerios than in Monet's water lilies. But they wore my wife down, and she was given a gaggle of toddlers and wide-eyed teachers to tour around the museum. I came home for lunch because I had forgotten my iPad that had notes on it for a presentation I was giving that night. I walked through the rose garden and noticed a tiny piece of sculpture left over from the Ashes exhibit from so long ago. It was half of a tiny bird. It had the kind of exquisite detail that my wife used to be so famous for. I was pretty sure it was an actual bird that she had cast in clay. I thought I could see a small piece of feather in one of the cracks. I idly wondered why I hadn't noticed it before. I went inside and poured myself a glass of orange juice. The fridge had pictures that my daughters drew, happy, crooked stick figures that looked nothing like the beautiful horrors their mother used to churn out. I was happy about that. I hoped they would fall in love with numbers like I did. It was absolutely silent, and I sipped the sweet citrus and enjoyed the nothingness. Then I thought I caught a vague scent of fresh paint in the air. Curious, I walked into the living room. And there was my wife, sitting on the leather couch with a bottle of wine, looking like an angel of death. She was covered head to toe in blue-gray body paint, with a special concentration underneath her eyes. She was wearing a revealing patchwork blue dress, covered in crosses of various shapes and sizes. Not a dress, I realized, but the shredded shower curtain from so many years ago. I could see most of her still perfect breasts, the curve of her waist. The bottle of wine was elongated and painted a strange shade of orange. The smell of paint was stronger in here, an overwhelming smell of lighter fluid, and something else I couldn't place. She had shaven her head. I stared at her for a while, minutes? An hour maybe? Eventually she took a swig of wine from the bottle, swirling it around in her mouth. I noticed paint, deep blues and even deeper reds, around her fingers. I sat down in the armchair across from her, unable to think of what exactly I wanted to ask her. Maybe because I knew. Maybe because I didn't want to know. I noticed a camera on the table between us. I went to pick it up and she rested her gray hand on mine before I could, softly, gently, with all the familiarity of years of marriage. She opened her mouth to speak, soft pink lips made pallid by the paint. They were mine! And I'd been sitting here, knowing what's behind the door to my daughter's room, with the Klimt wall we never repainted. Knowing why my phone keeps ringing with calls from the school, from the NYPD. Knowing why I couldn't find my sleeping pills last night. Knowing what that smell is. Seeing in my peripheral the red pooling and staining the carpet from underneath the door. The pile of clothes neatly folded next to my wife on the couch. I can picture that thick wire she used to fit all of her subjects where she wanted them. What a perfect, detailed recreation it must be. Because she's so perfect. I see the phoenix in my mind's eye. I hope, when she flicks that cigarette she's about to light, we both fucking burn. The Devil's Toy Box. Posted by Mr. Clarence Worley. The Devil's Toy Box is an urban legend that savvier horror fans will recognize as the inspiration for the infamous lament configuration from Clive Barker's seminal Hellraiser series. Though in reality the titular box is not a toy at all but rather a small room where the floor, the ceiling, and the walls are each composed of one giant mirror. According to the legend, if you stood inside this mirror room alone for too long, supposedly the devil would show up and steal your soul. In most versions of this story, he did so by flaying you alive. I mention all of this because about 2 weeks ago, I got an email from an old friend, someone who was well versed in my sordid past, asking if I could help out their younger sister, an 18-year-old girl who we'll call Erin, located in northern Louisiana. The specific parish where Erin lived shall go unnamed for reasons that will soon become obvious. Like pretty much everywhere else, the place where Erin grew up had its own annual haunted house attraction that went up every October. The attraction was called Farmer Graves' Haunted Orchard, and in years past, it had been every bit as thrilling as that name suggested, which is to say not very. So for the previous Halloween, the owners decided to spice things up by building several new interactive installations which included a windowless shack called the Devil's Toy Box. This shack housed a small room composed of large wall-sized mirrors. That's how Erin heard it described anyway. She had never been inside the toy box herself. Farmer Graves closed less than a week after opening, a result of the numerous people who had to be hospitalized after going inside the Devil's Toy Box attraction. Erin didn't get a chance to try out the box for herself before the closure, but she had heard countless stories about it from her classmates at school. Apparently, no one could last longer than 5 minutes inside the room. There was even a large timer set up beside the building that showed the current occupant's length of stay under a second clock displaying the longest recorded time up to that point, which maxed out at just over 4 minutes before the attraction finally closed. The man who managed to last that long, Roger Heltz, age 52, father of 3, had been reduced to a wide-eyed mute. To this day, he still hasn't said a word. One woman suffered a heart attack after just 90 seconds inside the box. A 17-year-old boy had to be dragged out, kicking and screaming. The boy was from a nearby parish and hadn't gone to Erin's school, though her friend Celeste claimed her parents were friends with the boy's mom. They went to his funeral when he killed himself 2 weeks later. Whatever the truth of the matter, town officials were quick to act in getting Farmer Graves shut down. Of course, that didn't stop people from talking about the now infamous attraction, which they began to do almost immediately. For the next month or so, it seemed like the toy box was the only thing on anyone's mind. It had become the stuff of legend, and of course, it didn't take long for the local kids to start venturing out to the orchard at night to see the box for themselves. Farmer Graves' Haunted Orchard was owned by a middle-aged couple named Will and Darlene Sawyer. When the town council ordered the Sawyers to shut the place down, they were so pissed about the ruling, they left most of the attractions still standing, including the Devil's Toy Box. The actual orchard was on a plot of land located at the rear of the Sawyers' property, and was only accessible by a narrow 2-lane dirt road. One night, several seniors at Aaron's school snuck out to the Sawyers' property on a dare and claimed they found the toy box's entrance padlocked. But then Will Sawyer showed up out of nowhere and asked them if they wanted to go inside. Will's sudden arrival had startled the young men, but once they realized that he wasn't mad at them for trespassing and in fact seemed genuinely happy to see them, the guys decided to take him up on his offer to have a go inside the box. Of course, they chickened out as soon as Will unlocked the door, and it seemed to swing open on its own, like a hungry mouth at the sight of food. That's how the rumors about midnight screenings of the Devil's Toy Box began to circulate. Most of the people who ventured out there afterwards claimed they encountered Will Sawyer after waiting beside the toy box for an unspecified length of time. A few even said that they went inside the box, but these claims were always dismissed as bullshit. No one came out of that box that was coherent enough to talk about it. Last week, Aaron's boyfriend Troy went out there with some of his idiot friends and Aaron hadn't seen him since. His parents reported him missing and Aaron even told the cops about the rumors surrounding the toy box. But they barely seemed to be listening. Now, Aaron was going crazy worrying about Troy, and of course, she was hoping I would be intrigued enough by her story to come with her to investigate Farmer Graves because she was too scared to do so by herself. Aaron's location was only a 3-hour drive from New Orleans, so I asked my friend Jason and his girlfriend Gretchen to take the ride with me. This way, I wouldn't feel so weird about driving all that way to see an 18-year-old girl I didn't know. We rolled into town at about 5 p.m. that Saturday and met up with Aaron at the McDonald's, as she called it. I laughed when I first heard her say that, and immediately felt like an asshole for thinking it was funny that Aaron's town only had one McDonald's. Our meet and greet started out a little awkward on account of all the stares we were getting from the rest of the restaurant. Then again, for strangers driving into town to meet a teenage girl at the McDonald's will do that. Thankfully, Gretchen was there to defuse the situation with one simple question. "Did you make that?" She was pointing at Aaron's backpack, which was actually a stuffed doll that I recognized as Lumpy Space Princess from the cartoon Adventure Time, only most of the stuffing had been removed and a purple pouch had been sewn into it that sealed closed via a matching purple zipper. The straps were made out of old, retro-looking seatbelts. Aaron nodded and Gretchen's jaw dropped. "Oh my God, will you make me one? Will you make me two?" Gretchen asked. "Sure, as long as you provide the supplies," Aaron said, laughing. "Deal." Gretchen was grinning ear to ear as she turned to face me. "You have to help this girl so she can make me tiny adorable backpacks." It was a little after 10 p.m. when we neared the end of the narrow dirt road that led to Farmer Graves' haunted orchard. We parked beside a tall wooden archway that designated the orchard's front entrance. I handed out flashlights from the small stash of them in my trunk and then we started inside. The place looked about how I expected it to. A row of brightly colored plywood shacks lined the vacant field beside several rows of satsuma trees that had been covered in fake cobwebs and scary decorations. Each shack had a sign displaying the name of a different attraction. There was Horn Toss, which, judging from the illustration on its side, was a ring toss game where you tried to throw halos onto a demon's horns. Werewolf Bowling, which was anyone's guess, and my personal favorite, The Exorcist, which was a mounted squirt gun game that had several wood cutouts of Linda Blair's face as its targets. Cartoon water tanks were painted below each of the mounted squirt guns that were labeled Holy Water. The Devil's Toy Box was the last shack in the row. It was painted a bright fire engine red, and the door, which made up one entire wall of the small structure, was padlocked shut. Someone had stacked a dozen or so rusted folding chairs against the side of the toy box. Aaron grabbed one of the chairs and began to unfold it as she said, "Now we wait." "How long?" Gretchen asked. "It varies, but hopefully not forever." Aaron motioned at the thick patch of wilderness to our left, and I turned to see a window glowing out there in the distant darkness. "See it? That's the Sawyer house. They must know we're here." And that's a good thing? Gretchen's tone was tense, and she had a look on her face that said she just realized how much she didn't want to be doing any of this. Before Aaron or I could answer, she turned to Jason and asked, "Baby, will you walk me back to the car?" Jason gave her an irritated look. "What? Why?" "Because all of this just got too real. You knew what we were coming out here to do. I explained it to you in vivid detail." "Jason, please?" "No. It's bullshit, Gretch. You do this every time." "I know. This is the fucking Avengers sneak preview all over again. I miss everything cool. I'm sorry." She batted her eyes as she gave Jason an adorable frown Gretchen had honed over many years of getting her way. Jason let out an exasperated sigh and I handed him the keys to the car. "I'll be right back," Jason muttered. I pulled out a chair and took a seat next to Aaron as we watched the beams from Jason and Gretchen's flashlights shrink off into the darkness. A thought came to me just then, as if this didn't already resemble an episode of Scooby-Doo, now we're splitting up. That's just asking for it. As soon as the words crossed my mind, we heard the crunch of approaching footsteps. Aaron and I stood in unison and exchanged a panicked glance before turning to face the forest bordering the orchard. A middle-aged man with long scraggly hair emerged out of the darkness and into range of our flashlights. He was holding an electric lantern and wearing an open bathrobe over a dirty white undershirt and sweatpants. Will Sawyer was basically Vincent Price if he had starred in The Big Lebowski. He smiled and gave us a thumbs up as he said, "You here for the box?" "Sort of," Aaron responded, and Will gave her a look like he had no idea what that could possibly mean. "Have you seen this guy?" I held up the photo of Troy that Aaron had texted to my phone as Will started to approach us. He squinted at the picture. "Maybe," he said. "When was that?" "A few weeks ago. He was the one that went in the box. Most won't go inside anymore. Lasted almost 3 minutes. Then he ran off, screaming." Aaron let out a sharp gasp. "Ran off? Ran off where?" Will pointed a thumb back at the dark patch of wilderness behind him and replied, "Into the fucking woods. Where do you think? I opened that door and he came shooting out, Dick. Flapping naked from the waist down. Had his boxers on his head and his pants wrapped around his neck like a scarf. It was honestly pretty funny." Erin covered her mouth with her hand as her eyes began to well with tears. Will grinned and said, "You want to see inside?" "We aren't here for the box," I said, stepping in front of Erin and glaring at Will. "But it's so breathtaking," the man said as he gestured toward the toy box's wide door, which slowly swung open. The interior was shrouded in darkness, but I could still see something vaguely human-shaped moving around inside the box. "Yeah, fuck that. Run!" I grabbed Erin by the arm and pulled her along with me as I sprinted away from the toy box. I could hear something chasing after us as we ran back toward the orchard's entrance, and I say, something, because it certainly didn't sound like a person. What I heard weren't footsteps, but rather one long scraping sound, accompanied by a wet breathing that reminded me of a panting dog. Thankfully, Jason heard me screaming just as he and Gretchen reached my car. They turned to spot me and Erin running towards them with identical expressions of pants-shooting terror. Jason must have caught a glimpse of the thing chasing after us too, because his own face went pale. He quickly unlocked my car and threw himself behind the wheel, screaming for Gretchen to get in. She hurried into the passenger seat, and the moment she buckled her seatbelt, he started the engine and accelerated toward us, closing the gap in a matter of moments. Jason slammed on the brakes as he neared, and the car screeched to a halt inches away from us. I went to open the back passenger door, but it was locked. So was Erin's side. I banged my fist on the window and pointed down at the locking mechanism. Jason mouthed, "OSHIT." He turned and scanned the door controls on the driver's side, looking for the master switch. The scraping sound was growing closer, but I refused to look back and banged on the window once more. A frustrated Jason finally leaned into the back seat and unlocked the door manually, but by then, it already had me. I can remember something dragging me back through the woods. I wasn't aware of much else, beyond the vague impression that I had been stung by an insect with some kind of paralytic venom. I felt a rush of air hit my face as the door swung shut in front of me. Then the lights came on and I realized where I was. Inside the Devil's Toy Box. The room's construction was actually pretty impressive. The floor was a thick sheet of transparent plexiglass layered over a mirror identical to the ones that made up the ceiling and walls. With the door shut, the mirror on its other side was just as seamless as the rest. Thin fluorescent bulbs ran between the crevices where each mirror met the next, washing the room and its endless reflections in a pale yellow light. I made the mistake of looking down at the chasm of reflections below me and almost fainted. I shut my eyes and held out my hands, feeling for the nearest wall. I leaned against it while trying to force my head to stop spinning. Someone was whispering my name. Joel! I opened my eyes to see my reflection smiling at me as it said, "You're his now." I let out a startled scream and backed away from the mirror I was leaning against. Something was moving around behind my reflection. It was hard to see what it was at first, but something was climbing up through the corridor of my reflections, making its way towards me. As it got closer, I saw that the something was me. Well, not exactly. His features were too blurred, as if this reflection of me had been so far back that its face had been reduced to a distorted mess. That was the Joel that was coming for me. I began to bang on the entrance wall, which felt padlocked into place. I let out a frustrated scream and finally turned to face the thing coming for me, only to find that my reflections had returned to normal. There was no longer a blurry me in the mirror. I let out a reflexive sigh of relief. A beat later, it emerged from the mirror beneath me and grabbed onto my legs. I woke up screaming and Aaron shot me a panicked look. We were still seated outside of the toy box. Sorry, I must have nodded off," I said. Erin opened her mouth. She hesitated before replying. "I'm worried about your friends." I rubbed my eyes. "Why? How long have they been gone?" "A while. Almost 30 minutes. I pulled out my phone to check the time, confirming what Erin had said, and I sighed. "Guess we should go check on them." As Erin and I started on the path back towards the entrance to the orchard, I nodded in the direction of the Sawyer house. "You think he's gonna show?" I asked. Erin thought about it for a moment and nodded. "I hope so. If not, I don't know what I'll do." I glanced at her, worried that Erin was about to start crying, but the look on her face was one of stoic acceptance. Just as I realized that I was staring at her, Erin looked up at me and we exchanged a moment of awkward eye contact. I smiled to try and play it off as I quickly faced forward. It was then that I realized we had lost our way in the dark and had somehow ended up in the dense patch of woods that bordered the orchard. How the hell? I scanned the surrounding wilderness with my flashlight, trying to get my bearings, but I couldn't locate the orchard or any of its accompanying structures in the darkness. Then, after a bit of what I thought had been backtracking, we found ourselves at the front steps of the Sawyer house. It was a rustic white two-story, 3 if you counted its 6-foot elevated flood-proof foundation similar to a lot of the homes in the area. The space beneath the porch was unlit and pitch black. Yet, staring into it, I could have sworn I saw movement under there as Erin gestured at the house. "Guess we might as well say hi," she said. Erin started up the front stairs before I could even begin to mention the many ways in which that might be a bad idea and, without hesitation, she knocked on the front door. "Shit," I muttered to myself, and hurried up the stairs to stand beside her. There was a tense beat of silence, and then from inside came the sound of footsteps across hardwood floor. The door was suddenly yanked open and a middle-aged woman with gray-streaked hair and the brightest blue eyes I had ever seen was standing there, glaring at us. This must have been Darlene. "You here for the box?" she said, giving both of us a cursory scan. I experienced a moment of intense déjà vu as Aaron replied, "Sort of." Darlene leaned outside and glanced around. "You better come in then." Aaron and I exchanged a cautious look as the woman turned and started back inside, leaving the front door open behind her. Aaron responded with a shrug that said, "Fuck it," and then entered the house. As I followed her in and shut the door, I heard something rustling in the bushes outside. "Lock it, please. There's shit all in these woods," Darlene said. The rustling sound grew louder as I turned the deadbolt, and it slid home with an ominous thunk. We followed Darlene into a den that reeked of weed as she gestured to a half-smoked blunt burning away in the ashtray. "Help yourself," she said, gesturing to the blunt. She took a seat on the sofa and muted the large flat-screen TV mounted to the wall in front of her. "Now, how can I help you?" I cleared my throat and replied, "We were told to expect a Will Sawyer. Is he coming?" "He killed himself last night, so probably not." "Oh my God! I am so sorry," I said. "Yeah, so how can I help you?" "Well," I held up my phone and showed her Troy's picture. "We were wondering if you remember seeing this guy out at the orchard recently," I said. Darlene examined the photo. "Not that I recall, but I never went out there much after the incident with the toy box. It's my fault that godforsaken room got built in the first place, and every time I see the thing, I wanna fucking cry," she said. Erin tilted her head, her tone curious when she asked, "It was your idea to build the devil's toy box?" Darlene slowly shook her head. "No, I was sick. Like really sick, and that demon or whatever Willie summoned told him he would make me better if we built a room of mirrors and got people to go inside it. If your friend went in there, I can tell you one of three things happened. He's either dead, catatonic in a hospital, or out in those woods. The ones that end up out there, something happens to them, like when a pig gets loose and grows tusks. But if it'll help, you're welcome to look for him here." "Here as in your house?" Erin asked. "Yeah." Darlene stood, slid her coffee table out of the way, and pulled the rug aside to reveal a crude hatch cut into the hardwood floor. "Will brought a few of the ones that went in back home. I think he felt sorry for them. Anyway, he kept them down here." The woman pulled open the trapdoor, and I was hit with a stench that was so potent. I don't know how we didn't notice it when we were outside. It was the smell of human filth en masse. Darlene nodded at me. "You got a flashlight?" I returned the nod and handed it to her. She switched on the light and aimed it down at the open hatch, revealing the upturned faces of 4 naked, emaciated men. "Any of them look familiar?" One of the men hissed at us. There was more rustling sounds from outside, and then something began to scratch at the living room window. Darlene glanced at the window as she said, "You've got them riled up tonight. How long were you two out there?" Before I could respond, a filthy hand with impossibly long fingers reached up and yanked me down through the trapdoor. I woke up screaming. I was sitting outside of the toy box and Jason was seated beside me. He gave me a sideways look and said, "You okay?" "Yeah. Bad dream. Sorry." I was still reeling from my nightmare within a nightmare as I glanced around. Something felt off. "Where are the girls?" "What girls?" "The girls. One of them being your girlfriend, Gretchen." "Dude, Gretchen broke up with me like a month ago. Remember? Or is this something you're doing for your story?" "My what?" "The story you're going to write about this. You're fudging the details, which you probably should. You gonna make up some fake reason why we're out here too? Some damsel in distress who needs you to investigate a derelict Halloween attraction. It's definitely a lot better than saying your depressed friend asked you to drive 3 hours to see some rundown shack in the middle of the night where nothing whatsoever happened, and then your friend shot himself." "What?" Jason slid the barrel of a handgun into his mouth and pulled the trigger. I was sitting close enough that the shot rendered me temporarily deaf. I stood and slowly backed away, my gaze fixed on the crater of blood and viscera that had been my friend's head mere moments ago, my own head ringing like a goddamn church bell from the large caliber handgun going off next to it. Still, I couldn't look away. Finally, I forced myself to turn and watch where I was going so that I could hurry up and get the fuck out of there. As I started toward the entrance, I glanced back once more to give my dead friend a final parting glance and halted when I saw that he wasn't there. Jason's blood and brains were still splattered across the front of the toy box, so I assumed that meant I hadn't imagined the whole thing, but the folding chair where he had been sitting was now void of his slumped, lifeless body. As I stood there, trying to figure out where Jason's corpse could have gone, a stream of stagnant-smelling water splattered against the side of my face. I turned to see Jason's, mostly, headless body draped over one of the Exorcist game's mounted water guns. I'm not exactly proud to admit this, but I froze when I saw him, thinking that Jason had gone full-on undead zombie. Though, after almost a minute of me standing there waiting for him to make the next move, I finally realized that wasn't going to happen. What I was seeing was nothing more than a dead body lying on a mounted water gun, which meant that someone or something was out there in the darkness, moving around a 160-pound corpse and propping it up on shit simply to fuck with me. This was the realization that finally sent me running. I was in my '91 Jeep Cherokee and halfway down the unpaved dirt road back to the highway when the Cherokee hit a bump that dislodged something from its undercarriage. I pulled over and started to get out so I could take a look at what it had been, and that's when I realized I was once again looking at Jason's mangled body. Moving a grown man's corpse is one thing, but moving it and then wedging it up into a car's undercarriage in the time it took me to get back to my Jeep? That's crazy talk. I really don't like to give this part much thought because the truth of it is kind of depressing. Real-life Jason had been really depressed about the breakup with Gretchen, and I guess I should have seen it coming, but I didn't. And so I went back home and started to write it all down, just as Jason knew I would. I got about this far when I was interrupted by a knock on the door to my apartment. I opened the door and saw there was a note taped to the outside. "There's a package for you in the lobby." It was about 11 p.m., and I was pretty sure the management at my complex had long since gone home for the evening, but I headed toward the lobby anyway out of sheer curiosity. I started down the steps leading to the first floor of my complex to see Jason's mutilated body leaning against a Coke machine at the bottom of the stairwell. Somehow, they had found me. I vaulted back up the stairs, seeing everything in slow motion as I sprinted to my apartment and locked the door. A moment later, the knob began to rattle as someone tried to turn it from outside. I was slowly backing away from the door when something big crashed through it. Though it was no longer my front door but rather the inside wall of the toy box that suddenly buckled inward to reveal a familiar set of headlights. Jason had crashed my Cherokee into the side of the toy box. I spent 25 seconds inside the devil's toy box. That's how long it took for Jason to run my car into it. Thankfully, the Cherokee was still drivable afterward and we promptly got the fuck out of there. I dropped Erin off at her house with an apology, explaining that there was nothing else I could do. Honestly, I don't know what she expected from me. This isn't supernatural. If your boyfriend is missing, you call the cops. I'm going home. Do I feel bad that I couldn't help her? Sure. But for what it's worth, we disabled the toy box and probably saved countless generations of dumb kids from making the same mistake as Erin's boyfriend. The bad news is that doing so has almost certainly scarred me for life. Even as I sit here days later, writing this all down for the second time, I'm still worried that it's not over. I'm worried that when I wake up tomorrow, it's going to be in front of that goddamn box.